Story 1. The Reaper in the Tree. There may be strange details in this story. Not all of them will seem to add up and appear to be significant, but it's all true. That sort of statement is common with these types of stories, but this time it is meant in absolute earnest. My grandfather was a mortician, and about a year after he retired, he himself passed on. He and I shared the exact same name, and it was slightly unsettling to hear my own name in the eulogy, to witness firsthand the lowering of a casket, revealing one's own name on the headstone. It gave the whole event a sort of dreamlike quality. I suppose such things got me thinking of my own mortality more than a funeral normally should. After the burial, we drove past the old funeral home. The business had been handed over to a new guy who did an all right job, I guess. Grandpa looked okay, though that wasn't on my mind. There was a large tree in the front yard of the old funeral home. Near the peak of the tree, amongst its naked branches, was a wicked, grim Reaper Halloween decoration. 7 feet in height, its dark robes flutter ominously in the wind like a flag of morbid purpose. Characteristically, its face wasn't visible, but nor was its blade. It was already early November, so I guess the new undertaker was just putting off taking him down. Still, though, it was a bit ghastly for a funeral home. As we returned to Grandma's house, everyone was talking about how much they were going to miss Grandpa, how sorry they were he was gone. What a great guy he was, a real funny bloke. Gonna miss his smile, except they never called him Grandpa, instead always opting to use my name. It felt like I was looking into the future, glimpsing my own passing, and it conjured up resonating images of the Reaper again, pointing at me, staring through me behind his hood, enveloping me in his darkness. After an evening of uncomfortable mourning, I'd had enough. I said I needed to take a walk and clear my head. The nice thing about small towns is the absolute isolation and quiet that comes with nightfall. During my wanderings, I gazed into a fenced backyard. The skull of a buffalo hung on a fence post. I wasn't sure if that was also a leftover Halloween decoration. I wasn't sure if it was anything. A squeaky mini windmill gave off an endless cycle of tiny screams to the garden gnomes quietly gazing at nothing. I adjusted my coat's collar and stepped across the street towards my grandfather's old place of work. I figured that sick decoration from earlier would look even better at night. I tilted my head upwards and was surprised to find nothing clutched in the leafless branches of the overgrown maple. Either he was finally taken down, or its black robes cloaked the Reaper in the darkness of night. I somehow felt it was the latter, as his deathly presence was actually made more real by lack of physical manifestation. That was my whimsical thought as I walked back across the street from the funeral home, when all of a sudden a gust of wind kicked up the sand, and I heard a loud scraping noise on the concrete behind me. Had I not been on edge from the funeral, I would have figured it was the wind blowing a tree branch across the road, but as of that moment it sounded so much like a scythe being grazed upon the concrete that my legs sent me sprinting back to Grandma's like prey from a predator. When I returned, I saw my grandmother and family playing pinochle. My heart was hammering a hole through my chest. They asked me why I looked so frightened. I rubbed my forehead of sweat, closed my eyes, and smiled. It was so stupid. I told them everything, chuckling as I did. How the day affected my mindset. The grim Reaper in the tree and the grazing on the road. They laughed and said the day was stressful on all of us. They asked me to join them. I happily comply. I took off my jacket and put it on the chair. I was about to sit down, but suddenly I paused. My uncle asked me what was wrong, and my grandmother asked me why I looked so pale. I couldn't hear them. They might as well have spoken in tongues, for upon my coat there lay a single diagonal gash upon the back. Story 2, Woof. It was nearing midnight, and the air was rapidly cooling. It was silent but for the few cars passing by, and the wind-rustling trees. I looked around outside once more before shutting the front door and bolting it. I turned off the hall light and made my way upstairs. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard a slight scratching sound. Ignoring it, I focused on the too strong mint flavor of my toothpaste and the tingling feeling in my mouth. I turned on the taps and studied myself in the mirror. There it was again, that scratching sound, although this time it seemed more frantic, louder. I armed myself with my toothbrush and entered the hallway. It was black, the mirror at the end of the hall reflecting little light. I quickly flipped the switches, chastising myself for not having left a light on. As I neared my kitchen, the scratching sound was replaced by a tapping, a strange, infrequent noise that only intrigued me further. I felt around for the light switch, a feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach. Counting to 3, I turned the lights on. I dropped the toothbrush and waited. Nothing. Walking further into the kitchen, I heard a familiar sound. Woof. I pulled back the blinds from the patio doors to see my dog sitting outside, waiting to be let in. How could I have forgotten about my dog? I always made sure she was in, safe from harm and from causing too much trouble. I started towards the door, only to see something in the glass doors, reflection that made me hesitate. I shrugged it off and opened the door, and once I had let my dog in, I realized what I had seen in the reflection. In on the living room couch was my dog. But how? And then I saw something that both terrified and confused me. My dog was too. There, sitting on my kitchen floor, was literally 2 of my dog. There were no physical differences whatsoever. From the coarse white fur to the pink collar around her neck, I took a step back, dumbfounded. Either I was imagining things, or what had I just let into my house? I felt uneasy looking at the dogs. I couldn't tell which one was my Maggie and which one was the other. I pulled out a chair from the table and sat down. Neither dog moved. Think, I told myself. Stay calm. Think. This dog. It cannot know you know it doesn't belong. But how can I tell the difference? Then I had an idea. I'll attribute it to all the time I've spent watching Criminal Minds, but really I was just so terrified I couldn't think. So I did the only thing I was able to do. Stare. I watched the dogs. I sat there and stared and waited until one of them moved. The first to move was the one on my right, who sauntered off into the living room and curled up on the rug. The other dog followed. But this dog had more of a spring to its step. Come here, Maggie. I grabbed a treat, a flavor I knew my real dog wasn't fond of, and summoned the second dog. She came galloping towards me and swallowed the treat whole. Before I knew what I was doing, I grabbed the dog by its collar, flung open the patio door and threw the thing outside. Then, as quickly as possible, I locked the door and flicked on the outdoor lights. I was just in time to see the dog trot off the patio and morph into a human-shaped black fog before blending into the shadows. Later that morning, After a sleepless night filled with fear and nightmares, the phone rang. It was the neighborhood gossip, an old woman named Gladys. She had called to tell me about an event that took place last night. "Didn't you hear that young lady, the one up the street who just moved in? She disappeared last night. Cops have been out all morning trying to figure out what happened." Maybe it wouldn't have been as weird if what happened to me last night hadn't happened. But then I remembered something, a minor detail, mediocre, really, that I hadn't registered when I had looked around outside my neighborhood last night. I remembered seeing that young woman call her dog inside and shut her front door. I must have been imagining things. After all, Gladys had mentioned that she had seen the young woman's yellow lab scratching at her back door just a little while after midnight. Story 3. Altera Militia and Anti-Christ. Ever since I was young, I've been having this recurring nightmare. In it, I'm standing in a dark room in the middle of a large circle with the symbol of an upside-down star in it, a pentagram, the symbol of the devil. I look around confused, as I have no idea how I got there and realize all I wear is my boxes. I see candles, skulls, but most of all, I see several people standing around me. All of them wear a hooded robe that covers their face. As the dream continues, they all lift their arms and mutter various incantations, which I don't understand. At the end of the dream, the tallest hooded figure, who I guess is their leader, walks toward me. Immobilized by fear, I watch as he comes closer, 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 until he is but a few inches from my body. I hesitate as he pulls out a rather large ceremonial knife. Just when I think he's about to stab me, he merely pricks his index finger with the tip of the knife and proceeds to draw another pentagram on my chest with his blood. And just as I am about to wake up, he whispers in a cold, raspy voice, "Altera Militia and Anti-Christ." To this day, I have never found out the meaning of the dream. Because of this nightmare, I've been sent to a counselor numerous times, and have even been sent to my local priest, but nothing has been concluded as to what is causing it. All I can do is try to ignore it. A couple of weeks have passed since I had the dream last. I start to think maybe it's finally stopped. Until today, I was browsing YouTube for scary videos. I searched for just about anything: ghosts, aliens, cryptids. Anything that could give me a good scare. I had gotten to a point when I was just clicking on videos in the sidebar when I saw one that nearly stopped my heart. It was titled Altera Militia and Anti-Christ. I recognized the title instantly. How could I not? I began to contemplate if I should watch it or not. I pondered this for a good 10 minutes before I had finally come to the conclusion to watch it. And as I waited for the video to load, a thought popped into my head. I quickly denied the thought and proceeded to watch the video. Within the first second, I recognized it. The thought that I just denied could ever happen, or would ever happen. The video was an exact recreation of my dream. I watched in horror, saw my dream unfold once again. Everything was there: the candles, the skulls, the hooded figures, and even me. I kept watching until I had finally gotten to the part that's haunted me all these years. I watch once again as the tallest hooded figure approaches me, stabs his finger, draws a pentagram on my chest, and whispers those dreaded words, "Altera Militia and Anti-Christ." His voice was exactly the same as in my dream. It gave me chills, but as I thought the video would end, it continued as the tall man retreated to his previous position. He then grabs a book off an altar and begins to recite an incantation out of it. As he reads, I see myself slowly collapsing until I am on my knees and grasping my chest. I am horrified as I watch myself scream with antagonizing pain. Just when I am about to close the video and back away from my computer, I see it. I see the most horrifying thing I have ever seen in my life. I watch my spasmodic body turn lifeless as a demon-like figure burst out of my chest. And just like that, the video ends. I sit there frozen. So that's how my dream ends, or is supposed to end. My mind is struck with fear. I pull my trash can and close as I vomit into it. I sit, staring at my computer screen, trying to make sense out of a million things. I'm not sure how much time passed before I moved. Minutes, hours, I'm not sure. But there was only one thing I made sure I did immediately. I pulled up a translation website and chose to convert Latin into English. I hesitated as I slowly typed in Altera Militia and Antichrist. I couldn't believe the words came up on my screen. My eyes almost burst out of their sockets when I saw that the most accurate translation it could give was the next host for the Antichrist, story for the house in the shade. These events took place when I was 5 years old in the rural South. You see, back then, my family was always moving from town to town because of my stepfather's work. Among the memories I have of this time include some family secrets that we still don't really talk about. What I'm about to relate to you is one such untold secret we would rather forget. The modest white house he had recently moved into was surrounded by 2 large willow trees that blocked out the sun, leaving our backyard shadowed and apart from the rest of the world. My 2 older sisters and I would often swing from their branches and climb their thick trunks, while our mother and stepfather would sit on the porch and contentedly watch us play in the late afternoon. We would ride bikes, swim in the inflatable pool, fly kites, and run on the slip and slide, you name it. We were very active children and never left a beautiful day unfulfilled. Across the street were a few other homes, and the sweet old couple directly across from us would often sit on their own porch and wave and smile at us as they drank lemonade from a large pitcher and sat in old wooden rocking chairs. Our mother often waved cheerfully to them when we were brought outside, and their smiles and sweetness always made the day more pleasant until, that is, a few months after moving into the old white home, our mother got the 3 of us together, telling us there was something we needed to talk about as a family. She told us sternly that we were no longer to wave at the sweet elderly couple across the street. She went so far as to tell us not to even look at them, and if we saw them waving at us, we were to come inside and tell her. This was an odd request to us. Nothing about the elderly couple seemed threatening or off in any way. Hell, our mother was the one who was always talking about how sweet they were to be so friendly. So this request baffled us and continued to baffle us for the rest of our stay in this particular home, but we minded and no longer responded to the couple across the street. Soon they had been easily forgotten as we got on with our lives in other homes in other towns. That is, until I was 16 years old, having a pleasant dinner out with my sisters and mothers, a rare occurrence for sure during this time of our lives. For whatever reason, Over our evening meal, the conversation turned to that quiet old white house and the elderly couple across the street. As soon as the subject had been brought up, my mother's joyful face had darkened. Her eyes fell to her lap, and it took her a moment before actually addressing us. She told us that she had been afraid to talk about the subject all these years, especially while we were still living in the home, afraid of needlessly making us afraid of staying in the quiet house in the shade of the willow trees. At that time, our stepfather had been working at the local Pepsi company, a well-paying job that allowed my mother to stay at home with the three of us while still making a modest living for our family. Apparently, one of his co-workers had actually lived in the house beside the Willow home for nearly 6 years and had only moved out the year before. My stepfather and the man were talking about the neighborhood and the house when at some point my stepfather mentioned the sweet, elderly couple across the street that liked to sit on their porch in the evening and watch us kids laugh and play. The man looked genuinely puzzled. He said that my stepfather must be joking, just pulling his leg. My stepfather replied, just as perplexed. With a sober face, the co-worker told my stepfather that there was no elderly couple living across the street. Sure, there had once been such occupants in the small home, but they had both died horribly nearly 3 years before from carbon monoxide poisoning. The couple's stove had leaked gas for days before they finally succumbed to the poisoning, and it took longer than that for anyone to find the dead couple. The man knew because he was the one who crossed the street to check on them, only to find the ghastly scene. He recommended we leave the house in the shade. Story 5. Darkness, you open your eyes. An endless ocean of black fills your vision. You blink, trying to cast the darkness away, but the veils of blackness still loom over your body. You try to move, but a cold wall, inches away from your face, pins you to the ground. Distressed, you stare into the empty void pressing down on you. Questions start to form in your mind. Are you asleep? Have you gone blind? Are you dead? Seconds become minutes, and minutes become hours, or so you think. You have completely lost any concept of time. You put your hands against a firm wall on top of you, trying to push yourself away from the darkness. You manage to move your body a few inches, your nails clawing at the hard wall and your legs scraping against the cold floor. But the top of your head hits another hard surface, and you are forced to stop. Suddenly, you hear a creaking noise coming from above. Something is on the other side. You can definitely hear a squeaking sound, faint but clear, but as swiftly as it started, the sound stopped. You are once again plunged into complete silence. Then a dreary thought sneaks into your mind. You are buried alive. It seems obvious now. The sound you just heard was your coffin groaning. Under the weight of the dirt above, you are trapped. A feeling of claustrophobia builds up in your heart. A cry of utter despair and hopelessness bursts out of your lungs. Help, you shout, but you know it is all in vain. Nobody can hear you, your eyes wet. A warm tear drops on your cheek. You didn't want it to end this way. You had dreams, family, friends. You had your life to live, but your cruel fate has stripped everything away. You close your eyes. You pray that your torture ends quickly. After an indefinite amount of painful minutes, you begin to drift away, your existence slowly washing off the face of earth. But then you hear a sound. At first, you can't determine what it is, but slowly you recognize the familiar whooshing sound of a strong breeze. You must be very close to the surface, New hope is planted in your heart. You start yelling again, hoping to catch the attention of anyone passing near you. Suddenly, you hear a loud thump. The roof of your coffin bends inwards, the cold surface now pressing down on your face. You turn your head sideways to allow for breathing space. Something has fallen on your coffin. Is it dirt about to crush you? No, it can't be. Whatever caused the bend-in is still moving. Maybe you aren't buried, but if that isn't the case, then where are you? A shiver runs down your spine. A question you should have thought earlier pops into your mind. How did you end up here? You realize you have no recollection of past events. Where were you, and what were you doing? Your memory is completely blank. But you can't give it more thought, as a creaking sound breaks the silence once more. The bend-in above you subsides, indicating that the weight on top has shifted. You can very faintly hear a whimpering sound, like someone is trying to muffle his crying. Suddenly, a flash of light blinds you. You look at your right. A little crack has appeared in the blackness that surrounds you, allowing a sliver of light to invade your world of darkness. Your heart jumps. This is your escape. You extend your hand, your fingers touching the edge of the crack. You are surprised to find not the hard surface you imagine, but a smooth and soft cloth that parts under your light touch. You push with your fingers the velvet-like material apart, creating a hole big enough for your hand to pass through. With another push, your hand exits your dark prison and enters the world of light. The fresh air cools your skin while you blindly explore your surroundings with your hand. At first, your palm lands on a cold surface that seems to extend beyond your reach. But moving your hand up, you again come in contact with a soft material. You grab onto it, trying to determine how far up it goes. You start climbing up the cloth with your hand, but almost immediately, your fingertips reach the edge of the strange fabric. Suddenly, a high-pitched screech pierces your ears. Mommy, Mommy. After a few seconds, you hear a door opening. What is it, sweetie? A monster is under my bed. Story 6. Dan. One day, I was walking home from school. I only lived about a block away, so that was easy. But as I was walking home one day, I saw something peeking out of the sand. It was a little gray video game cart. It had to be for the old Game Boys, or maybe the Game Boy Colors. This was on, like, the last day of middle school in 2005. Shows you how old I am, right? I took it home and put it in my Game Boy Advance, which I swore I was going to get rid of any day now, really. No, really, I'm going to get a DS. Eventually, it didn't have a label. That should have given me a clue something was up. But I put it in the Game Boy, and it was Tetris DX. Awesome. I looked through it, and I found them, the high scores table. And at the top of the high scores table was someone named Dan, with a high score of 683,092. I started playing, trying to beat that high score, but I had homework to do, so I didn't get very far. I went to school and told my friends about it the next day. They found it cool, and we all got together and started speculating about who Dan was, and whether he missed his game, and how he got so good at Tetris. I came home and stayed up, honestly, way too late, trying to beat it. That night, T-Hawk, I only got 49,594 as the highest. But something weird happened. When I left for school, there was a note on my front porch. Don't beat my score, Dan. There was a little picture of a stick man with a knife in his chest. I figured one of the guys from school had put it there. Maybe Ben, whatever. Pranks aren't very funny if you just come out immediately and say you did it. It happened the next day. Don't beat my score, Dan. This time the stick figure was decapitated. I put it in my pocket and went to school. I didn't even mention it, 'cause I figured that they knew I'd found it. And that night I went home and played Tetris. And that morning I got a note from Dan. Don't beat my score, Dan. The stick figure was being shot in the groin by another one. I was getting annoyed, but my friends were smart guys. They know comedy, rule of 3 south. After 3 times it stops being funny. At lunch, I kind of tried to lead the conversation that way, see if I could get them to tell me about it. Tell me it was all a joke, just fun and games, but they seriously had no idea. Okay, that's how they wanted to play it. Fine. I kept playing. Every night I went home and played Tetris. Every day I got another note. Don't beat my score, Dan, and a stick figure who'd been murdered in a new, creative, gruesome way. And then one night, finally, after a month of this, I was doing it. I was getting really, really good. Seriously, I was starting to kick ass and take names. I was up in the 100 south regularly, even the 200,000 sometimes. And then this night I was getting in the groove. You know how there's the right level of tired, the right level of drunk, where you're really good at things. Well, I hit it. I'd been up all night, and I was getting good. I could tell this was it. This was going to be my high score. No, this was going to be the high score. I was so excited. It was going to happen. I was going to beat Dan. The Tetris tower was getting bigger and bigger. I was in the zone, racking up points like it was my last day on Earth, and that was the night. My best night, my highest scoring Tetris night. I was playing up until the sun rose, and I went out on the porch to see if Dan was coming. And you know what happened? Nothing. Monsters aren't real. There aren't killers stalking you, waiting for you to break some arbitrary rule, some made-up thing that only they know about. Fall into some arcane trap or push the wrong button and have your world destroy, have your life torn apart because of some weird video game. That only happens in horror movies and creepypastas. Although, to be fair, I only got 128,859, so maybe I just suck at Tetris. Story 7. Cold Shoulder. My grandmother has looked after me completely since I was about 4. My mom couldn't cope after my dad died and handed me over to her mother. I see my mom a couple of times a month, but she's always distant and awkward, and not much fun to talk to. My grand's house is huge, a mansion to me when I was younger, covered in mirrors, with many bedrooms to run in and out of, and a long, loping landing covered in light blue carpet that I spent many nights with friends rolling around and playing board games on. At the end of this landing is the bathroom, tiled and decorated in the late 60s. It will never win any awards for interior design. Everything is a not-so-subtle shade of lime green, including the bath, which always makes a horrible gurgling sound when the plug is pulled, and the toilet. The only thing that looks out of place is a huge mirror on the wall, which stretches about 3 feet and is directly opposite the bath. I had never particularly enjoyed the bathroom. Well, no one really does. It serves a purpose and is used functionally. But if you stood at the dark wooden door and looked out along the landing, you could see all the doors to other rooms, and the rooms themselves if their door was ajar in the dark. This was terrifying. It was like being stared at and surrounded by gaping black holes, and there was always a feeling that something was going to come out of them. The bathroom was like the vantage point, the place where you could see the entire top level of the house. One evening I decided that my hair was greasy enough and my body dirty enough to need a scrub, so I ran the bath and studied my face in the mirror. Throwing off my clothes onto the plastic laminate, I closed the door, shutting out the sounds of Gran making dinner downstairs. Soon the water steamed and was deep enough to sit happily in, so I sat gingerly down and folded my legs. I'd forgotten how relaxing baths were after having just showers for so long. If I bent my head slightly, I could see my body and the bottom half of my face in the metallic surface of the overflow plug, which was slightly above the water level. Thinking idly about the events of the day, I glanced at my chest in the plug and rolled my eyes over to my shoulder and stiffened. Behind my shoulder was another shoulder. My reflection was small and stained with water droplets, but I could see it clearly. Another shoulder behind mine. Another person behind me. I was gripped with the worst fear I have ever experienced. How long had it been there? What was it? Dear God, what was in the bath with me? I sat hunched for what felt like an age, my eyes straining, frozen on the reflection of my shoulder, and the foreign one behind it. I don't remember breathing, or how the water got so cold so quickly. Sweat dripped down my chin and fell into the water, breaking the suffocating vacuum that had appeared. How long would it sit unmoving? In my mind's eye saw this terrible creature, whatever it was, reaching out a hand. No, I was not going to let it. Terror and a sick curiosity overcame. Since I twisted round in a panic and churned the water as I span. My back scraped against the lid of the bath as my neck snapped to see what had been sitting cross-legged behind me. There was nothing there, just small ripples bouncing against the end of the bathroom where I'd rocketed sideways. Water had enveloped the floor when I'd turned and was now dripping in a steady stream down the side of the bath. Silence. I shook my head and felt more than a little foolish, and sighed in relief and embarrassment. How could there possibly have been anyone there? There was no one in the whole house but me and Gran, cooking dinner downstairs. I could hear the radio in the kitchen. Wait, I hadn't been able to before the bathroom door had been closed. I leant over the side and gripped the bath with shriveled fingers. If you stood at the dark wooden door and looked out along the landing, you could see all the doors to other rooms, and the rooms themselves if their door was ajar. They all were the landing carpet, so baby blue and inviting, was now peppered with dark blue, and all the doors were open. Bonus stories. Story 1. Sunburn. I awoke to the sound of my mother in the kitchen. Gradually, I swung my legs out from under the covers and got dressed in john shorts and a simple white T-shirt. Then I grabbed a white cloth off of my dresser. It was a bandana that I had found earlier in the year in January. It was in a box at a yard sale labeled, "Do not wear in sunlight." A funny joke, I thought. I took it to the lady running the sale. She was old and frail. She stared at me. "Don't wear that in the sun." I laughed and bought it anyway. What an old hag. I put it on my head and tied it in the back I had never before worn it. As I walked into the kitchen, my mother said to me, "Darling, go out to the shed and get the hedge clippers. I need you to trim the holly bushes out front." I agreed to do as she asked. After all, she was my mother, so I strode down the cobblestone path behind our house towards the shed. As I neared that old shed, I noticed how hot it was outside. It was so hot outside that the heat was coming off of the surface of the shed in waves. I pushed open the door. "Ow!" I exclaimed. The sizzling door blistered my hand. I shook it off and went inside. Oh, it was sweltering. I immediately broke into a sweat. The drops rolled off my nose and onto the dirt floor of the shed. I wanted to quickly find the hedge clippers. As I dug around in a tool box, the sweat on my face started to blur my vision. I wiped my brow and was surprised to find that the sweat didn't come off. I passed it off as a trick of the heat, blinked my eyes, and found the hedge clippers. I left the shed, only to find even more heat outside. Oh, it was painful, but I had to do what my mother asked, or I'd be in trouble. I clumped to the front yard and started on the bushes. The sun beat down on my back and arms. Even my butt felt like fire, and I was crouching, hiding it from the sun. My front and face and feet and fingers were all burning too. The heat was immeasurable, intense, and I suffered all afternoon. Every time I tried to wipe the sweat away, it stayed and got sopped up in my bandana, created a soaking wet veil on my head, and finally the bushes were finished. I quickly retreated inside and into my room to get clothes. Then I flew into my bathroom to take a shower and clean up. I gasped at my reflection. Bright red skin stretched over my face and back and front. No tan lines were visible. My whole body was sunburned, and the sweat remained unclearable from my visage. I touched my skin. Agony erupted all over my body. I then realized I hadn't removed the bandana. I tried to pull it off. It wouldn't come. I tried in vain to rip it from my head, but it wouldn't budge. On the third attempt, I accidentally touched my burned skin. In a fit of pain, I scratched my forehead. My skin was already peeling. I took hold of the peeled piece and pulled, eyes closed, for I could sense the coming agony. But it didn't come. I continued to pull at the piece. Finally it came loose. I opened my eyes and screamed. My face had been peeled off, and the bandana had come with it. I looked at the bandana in horror. The memory of the box it was in coming back to me. Slowly, the rest of the skin on my head fell off, peeling in slow motion. I watched in horror as the skin on my arms and legs wet. Just as my eyes burned, bloodshot, were about to fall out, I noticed brownish, smeared words on the bandana, written in blood and sweat. "I warned you not to wear it in the sun." Story 2, the last. Words. One morning my family and I went to my grandparents' house in Mississauga. My sister and I always used to play in their large backyard, which overlooked a sprawling ravine. I was especially excited today because my sister and I had planned a hike down the ravine before lunch. The climb down was quite a bit more difficult than I had expected due to the steep hillside, but my sister, being 3 years older, seemed to make short work of it. Once we reached the bottom, we were off into the woods. It was only a minute or two before we came across an old, run-down hut. It looked as if someone had been squatting in it years earlier. We slowly approached the front door, and I got a bit of a glimpse inside. Everything was dirty and moldy and looked as if it had been long abandoned. Without warning, my sister loudly yelled out, "We have to leave now." The sheer panic in her voice was enough for me to not even give it a second thought. We quickly turned away from the hut and started to run. I barely got one step in before I saw it. In plain view, there was a pile of severed limbs from the elbows and knees down. I could barely comprehend what I was seeing or how I had only just now noticed such a horrible monstrosity. Every little remnant of skin had been savagely torn away, revealing the rotting wet flesh beneath it, all stacked in a disturbingly neat pile against an old mossy maple tree. I stood in shock, staring at the tidy pile of torn limbs for what seemed like hours. Eventually, my sister frantically tapped my arm in horror. She was staring, terrified, at a second tree to our left, which was covered in all the missing skin, tightly stretched over the bark and nailed into place, as if trying to give the tree a second skin. It was then that we both heard the sharply clear whisper, "They'll never find you." I instantly felt the urge to scream at the feeling of absolute terror as we started running as fast as we could towards the steep incline of the ravine edge. I used my hands as extra momentum against the steep terrain. My sister was quite a ways ahead of me. After running for what seemed like forever, I could hear my mom's cheery voice laughing and joking with my grandparents in the backyard. I saw my sister disappear over the sharp crest of the hillside. I could hear her screaming to my mom and hear them both realizing that I hadn't made it to the top yet. I was just able to see into the backyard, see my mom running towards me, and it happened. I slipped at the edge of yard and started to slide back. I had only missed my mother's outstretched hand by mere inches. I had almost stopped myself sliding as my foot caught on something and I tumbled. I couldn't even feel the pain of rolling through the sharp brush on the hillside as I was being overcome by the fear of where I was falling to. As I tumbled, I repeatedly caught glimpses of the tattered old hut. I noticed a faint figure of a large man covered in dark blood, creeping ever closer to the bottom of the hill's edge. This was it. I was going to land directly at his feet. With a final grasp at a tree branch, I hit the ground with an bone-shattering thud. Then nothing, only darkness. I could feel my body shiver in a piercing sweat. It took me quite a while to realize that I was in my bed, so frightened that I literally could not move. I could still feel the nightmare man's intense stare as I tried to regain my composure. I laid perfectly still with my eyes shut as tightly as I could clench them, and out of the darkness in the same sharp, crisp whisper I heard, "They'll never find you." Story 3. A Lucid Reality. It was about midnight when I finally passed out. I had been working my ass off on writing an article about some mental patient saying his dreams are becoming real. Crazy bastard. Either way, I needed sleep. I did my regular nightly routine. I brushed my teeth, changed into an old t-shirt and boxes, crawled under the covers, and fell asleep listening to the sound of the city streets. All was well, or so I thought. At around 3, I was awoken to an odd sound. It sounded like something was dripping out onto the carpet in the living room. Typical shitty hotel plumbing, though. I got out of the bed to assess the problem. It was pitch dark, so I hit the lights. It immediately seemed like I was on the surface of the sun. I instinctively closed my eyes and reached out for something. I reached out and grabbed what seemed to be someone's shoulder. My eyes burst open to see a pale, grinning face with the word "smile" carved grimly on its forehead. With a mixture of saliva and blood coming out of a gaping mouth full of long, dirty, sharp teeth. "Ah, fuck," I shouted. I was about to run away when the thing grabbed my arm. I was paralyzed. I felt its cold grip engulf my entire body. "Going somewhere?" it said in a two-tone, demonic voice. That's when I snapped, shoulder to see the thing's nails covered in fresh blood. My fresh blood. This didn't stop me, though. I kept running toward the door. I ran outside into the loud, busy streets of New York. I started screaming for help, but it seemed like no one was looking at me. No one even seemed to recognize I was there. As I was begging and screaming for help, I felt the thing grab me again. He spun me around and plunged his nails into my stomach. I fell. The last thing I saw was the thing laughing hysterically at my dying. As I fell into an abyss of darkness, my eyes suddenly burst open. I was in a hospital bed. It was morning. I could hear a heart monitor beeping along with my pulse. I was alive. It was all a dream, a twisted dream. The doctor was standing there when I woke up. "Oh, good, you're awake," he said. Where the hell am I?" "You're in Bellevue Hospital. We found you running around outside of your hotel screaming for help. Someone called the police, and they took you here. We thought you were on drugs at first, but we ran a test. You seem to be clean. We figure you must have had some very vivid nightmare and began sleepwalking." At first I was confused, but then remembering the dream, it all made sense. "Oh, well, that's a relief," I said. "Quite indeed. You seem to be having an extremely terrifying nightmare. Either way, you safe now. If you need anything, just call and the nurse will be right with you." The doctor was getting ready to leave, but then I found something strange about this whole thing. Wait, if I was just sleepwalking, then why the hell am I in a hospital? I asked. "Oh yes, when the police found you, you were passed out. They thought you had overdosed. But when they picked you up, they saw blood along your back and stomach. Somehow you managed to get 3 cuts all the way down your back and a deep puncture into your stomach. Don't worry though, we stitched you up and you should be out of bed in no time. Anything else I can answer?" I was speechless. The doctor left. Everything went silent, it seemed like, except for the patient next door to me. He seemed to be laughing hysterically. Story 4. My friend Lucas. When I was 5, I had a best friend. Lucas was his name. He and I were practically inseparable. We'd sit next to each other in class. We'd hang out at recess and lunch in the schoolyard. He'd always come over and visit after school and on the weekend, typical best friend stuff. He was fiercely loyal, even to the point of beating up other kids who made fun of me. I remember one time when this older kid called Stuart was picking on me, and Lucas ended up pushing him off the monkey bars and breaking his left arm. Stuart cried like a little girl and never bullied anyone again, much to many young kids' relief. Another time, a few years after that, when a few kids, Shane, Ryan, and Jesse, used to gang up on me and beat me up, Lucas roundhouse kicked Shane down a flight of stairs and knocked Ryan and Jesse's heads together so hard that they both lost teeth. When the school heard about that, I stood up and took the blame. Hell, it was the least I could do for my friend who'd helped me more times than I could count. I was let off with a slap on the wrist after showing my own bruises. They'd given me first anyway. Upon reaching high school, Lucas went to a different school, somewhere a long way away. that I'd never heard of before, and so I had to make new friends to make the days pass faster. Though I'd always catch up with Lucas on weekends and school holidays. It was odd, though. It seemed the more time I'd spend with Lucas, the more standoffish my new friends would become. He'd always show off his bruises and scars, and through some kind of best friend empathetic link, I'd always seemed to be able to feel them myself, as if I'd been the one in his fight stories. He'd often offer to teach me to fight for myself, but as bullying was no longer an issue at my high school, I'd just shrug it off and tell him it would be a pointless exercise. Well, don't come crying to me when you get beat up. He'd always joke, though I knew I'd always be able to rely on him in a pinch regardless. Years went on, and we finished our school lives, still staying very close, though our lives took us down very separate paths. I became a psychologist, while he never really liked to talk about his career. I'd often see new scars appearing on him, and more than once, when we'd catch up, I'd notice blood on his clothes. Eventually, he decided he wanted to see me at my workplace as one of my patients. I told him it would be unwise, as we were best friends, but that I could recommend a really good colleague of mine, and he eventually accepted after much convincing. After speaking to my colleague I'd recommended Lucas to, I was surprised to hear that although he'd call and make appointments, he'd never show up to them. I confronted Lucas about this and simply got the answer, "You're the only one I can trust." Eventually, I gave in and took Lucas as my own patient, and was quite disturbed with what he had to say. He'd talk about his younger life and how he'd get beat up and then fly into a rage, and how since he was young he's never been able to control it. He described events in such detail that I felt like they were my own memories. I mean, I had been there in his childhood, so of course I'd witnessed it happen. But parts of what he was saying I could almost see through my own eyes. "Lucas, don't be absurd," I said to him, rather unprofessionally. I was always the one getting beaten up, and you'd be the one to jump in and save me. Now you're the one being absurd, he said calmly. Look deep into yourself and tell me, did anyone else ever even acknowledge my existence? Story 5, The Library. As I crossed the threshold of the library, I noticed that all sounds of the street stopped. I shrugged it off as being well soundproofed. I slowly weaved my way through the aisles, finding nothing that drew my attention. As I drew deeper into the depths of the building, the lights grew dimmer, until eventually the only light came from candles in brackets. Along the wall, the books grew darker too, though not in the same sense. They grew more arcane. Scared, I turned around to leave. I walked briskly back the way I came, but the overhead lights never returned. I retraced my steps and took different turns, all to no avail. Was that movement? My gaze tracked to the end of the aisle I was in, and saw a shape moving slowly away from me. I chased after it, calling out. As I got closer, the shape sharpened into that of a man. I asked him breathlessly how to get out of the library. He didn't move. Then, out of nowhere, he whipped his head around. I only caught a glimpse of his face before I threw my arms up to protect my own, and he bit me. Caught my arm good. Down I went and scrambled away from him. I managed to find my footing and ran like hell. My lungs felt like they were about to burst when I finally stopped. I had no idea where I was. I was scared and exhausted. Before I knew what I was doing, I laid down and went to sleep. I would love to give you a time when I woke, but I don't know for sure. I had lost all sense of time. I dragged my aching body to my feet and stumbled down the hallway. I noticed it getting brighter, the books more light-hearted. I looked up and saw an ancient light bulb. I started to run down the hall. Glancing upwards as I ran, the lights grew brighter, until I caught a glimpse of the doors. I ran towards them, freedom so close I could taste it. As I stepped up to the doors, they stayed still. They didn't open. I reached my fingers into the crack in the doors and tried to pry them open. They wouldn't budge, locked I thought, but that idea was shattered as an older man walked to the doors, and they slid open for him. He threw me a glance, and I thought I recognized his face as he tipped his hat to me and walked out into the world. It hit me. That man in the aisle, he was leaving. I walked to the open doors behind him and tried to walk out. As I strode towards the open doors, I hit something. It was like walking into a wall, but all that was in front of me was air. I hurried to the librarian to ask for help, no matter how loudly I asked. She ignored me. She glanced up once, but it was like she was looking past me, through me. I tried to shove a pile of books over to get her attention, but I couldn't move them. Essie calmly reached over and picked the top book off the pile. I had to figure out what was going on. She stood up and began to walk away, and I grabbed her arm, pulled her back. Her arm didn't move, but she sort of seemed to be looking for something and followed where I led. I led her to a table and let her go. She looked at the table and under it, but seemed to decide she didn't find what she was looking for, and went back along her way. So that's my story. I'm still here today. We haven't been busy, but you never know. You may come in sometime looking for a book. I may take your hand and lead you deeper and deeper into the library. You may catch a glimpse of me and ask for help out. I may just get my freedom at the cost of yours. I'm waiting for you. Story 6. Jeff the Killer Goes to Sleep. Jeff crawled silently through the bedroom window of his latest victim and gradually crept over to the foot of his bed. His last encounter hadn't gone so well. The kid's father had intervened, and Jeff had lost one of his favorite knives when he threw it at the old man whom had startled Jeff when he brandished his shotgun at him, so it was his fault. Really, the knife had missed its intended target and embedded itself into the David Bowie poster that hung on the boy's bedroom wall. Just one of life's little ironies, Jeff thought, chuckling to himself. Luckily, he had remembered to bring a spare with him this night, and hiding behind a bush, he applied his hourly eye drops, which were the only way for him to keep his eyes moist. Since that night when he had removed the lids with a craving knife, it seemed like a good idea at the time. He applied a few extra drops this time as the last struggle, followed by the long, hard run that it took to flee the scene, had dried up his eyes significantly, to the point where he had almost gone blind. I'll get them later, he muttered to himself shortly after the escape. After all, his father had always told him to finish what he had started. Then again, old Dad gotten himself carved into coleslaw, so how smart could he have been? Jeff was feeling hopeful about this next venture, though, and he raised the knife high above his head, taking a moment to savor the murder he was about to commit as he liked to treat every slaying like a Thanksgiving dinner. But as he was about to plunge the knife into his helpless victim, revel in the sensation of his hands submerging themselves in a freshly opened stomach, and giggle at the pitiful gasps of shock and pain that usually followed, he heard a voice that made him stop in his tracks. "Hi there, Smiley," the voice said. "It sure took you long enough to get here." It was the voice of the man in the bed. It spoke in a soft but level tone, without a hint of fear. "Go to sleep," Jeff demanded in his own grainy and intimidating voice, the voice that stuck helpless terror into the hearts of victims all over town. But this man just chuckled casually. "I'm afraid you're in no position to give orders, son," he said, reveling a very subtle southern drawl that Jeff had not noticed a moment ago. Jeff remained frozen. Now he wanted more than anything to kill this man and get it over with. But he could not move. For the first time since acquiring his deformity and finding employment as the local homicidal maniac, Jeff had felt the icy grip of fear clutch at his spine. "I said, go to sleep," he bellowed. His voice was shaking, as was his entire body. He was shaking so violently that he couldn't hold on to the knife, and it dropped from his hand. Suddenly, the man sat up. The movement was so sudden that it startled Jeff, and he stumbled back a couple paces. Jeff still could not make out any of the man's features, only a vague outline of his upper body. It was as if the man was deliberately shrouding himself in darkness. The figure turned to face Jeff, and although he could not see them, he could feel the man's eyes staring directly at him, penetrating into the deepest regions of his being. "You may not know who I am, but I've been waiting for you for quite some time," the figure said. "You see, I've known about your little reign of terror for quite a while now, and I intend to put a stop to it tonight. But before you die, perhaps I should take a moment to introduce myself. My name is—" A cold shiver ran through Jeff's entire body upon hearing the man's name, a name consisting of what Jeff immediately recognized as the last two words he would ever hear: Chuck Norris. Story 7. The 3-Day Dark. Friday, the 13th of November, 2015. At 3:40 p.m. GMT, it happened. The world descended into a sudden, complete darkness. Chaos ensued. In our little office on the 10th floor, we huddled together in the ominous pitch black, awaiting the light. There was a television in our break room, and someone found the remote control. Using the memory of our fingers, we managed to change the channel to news. For a long time there was just silence. Then, through the seemingly endless dark, came a voice, a newsreader, bravely finding her desk and attempting to reassure her viewers, spoke to us in her soft, trembling voice. They had no idea what was happening, but people needed to remain calm and keep together amid reports people are disappearing in the dark, wandering from their friends and family, and becoming lost or finding danger. We spent the next 3 days in the office, finding our bearings in the dark and managing to eat and sleep in relative comfort, despite the feeling that we were frozen in some kind of alternate universe. Then, exactly 72 hours after the darkness came, it was gone. Our eyes burned from the sudden light, but we soon adjusted and agreed that we should, as a group, head downstairs and outside. Descending the stairs, a smell greeted us. Retching. I knew immediately what it was, and reluctantly turned the corner into the last turn of the stairwell. Thinking perhaps someone had fallen down the stairwell, and died from their injuries. I was wrong. I think she had been a woman, though I can't be sure. She had been flayed and gutted, though I don't know in which order. Every inch of her skin was missing, though her eyes and teeth remained, turning her corpse into a grinning staring monster. I wasn't the only one who threw up. Needing to escape the sight, we burst through the main doors into the foyer and froze. Skinless bodies were strewn across the small foyer, almost 15 of them, by our reckoning from the brief look we had at them. We didn't intend to stay for long, but found the 4 doors were locked and we couldn't break the glass. Someone, I don't remember who, had the idea of heading to the security room and seeing if we could radio for help. Picking our way past the bodies with churning stomachs, we found the security room open and the guard flayed inside. By mutual agreement, we heaved his body out and shut ourselves in, while one of the others tried to make contact. Some of us started looking at security footage of the 4 from the last 3 days. We couldn't believe what we saw. It hadn't gone dark at all. We had gone blind, and while we were blind, they had come sinewy, smoky black shadows, without faces, only eyes, strange, glowing eyes. They were flaying people and wearing their skin as a disguise. We tuned into the CCTV on our floor and watched in horror as they walked among us, but chose none. To this day, I don't know why. At one point, they were gathered together watching us, but soon after, they departed and caused havoc in an office on the floor above instead. We were soon rescued, but in the following weeks, the world descended into lunacy. Everyone knew about the flaying, about the imposters, but no one knew who was real and who wasn't until it was too late. Without trust, humans cannot survive side by side. I remained with 2 of my colleagues. Those I knew were not changed. We packed camping gear and decided to make our way to the wooded area outside of town, to keep away from society as it became more and more volatile. We had it all worked out, and we had high hopes for the recovery of humanity. Then we woke up one morning, and we were blind again. 3 days later, the light came back, and I was with both of my friends and one body. I don't know which it is, but I'm sure it won't be long until we find out.